I'm going to go with Tim on line 3. You'll probably be our last caller for the day. Tim, hi. You're on the air?
How you doing, sir?
We're doing well. So what's up?
I had a bit of a question. I'm currently a student at St. John's University in Staten Island in Queens. And for the past year and a half, I've been sort of a bit back and forth with the whole God, no God thing. I mean, I've asked my professors who are theology teachers. I've been back and forth with the whole Atheist Experience as well. And the evidence that I've seen is they're both sides present compelling arguments. My question is, as someone who's looking to further my experience and further my development as a person, as well as sort of finally take a side on something, is there any sort of evidence that you could give me, or sort of your own experience or perspective to develop a stance on the whole matter?
Well, I can. I think we both just talked about, and also the last caller. You know, it's a lengthy process of thinking about these things and reaching conclusions about things. So being on the fence and back and forth and not being quite sure what you think about it or what you believe and don't believe is an entirely natural process, and for some people it can take years. So don't feel that you're in any sort of an unusual problem situation that you need a quick exit from. Don't feel like you need to draw quick conclusions. You may very well look at things and conclude that you're a believer, and that's fine. If that's the journey you take. I can give you a good source online is the infidels.org website, because it has an extensive, on-the-site library of articles and essays, not only by atheist thinkers but also by pretty prominent Christian apologists. There are both points of view given, and then quite often it's a chain thing where there will be an article by an apologist, and then there will be a link to the rebuttal of that article, by an atheist or an agnostic, and then the apologist sometimes will address the rebuttal back, and there will be an actual dialogue kind of going on. And I found a lot of those articles to be, extremely thought-provoking and full of good information, especially a few years back, about like 10, 12 years ago, when I was first discovering the ACA. I knew I didn't believe in God, but I didn't necessarily have any, well-constructed arguments of my own that I could kind of whip out. I didn't have that arsenal at hand. So that's a good source, and you can just take your time with it. Yeah. And what about you, Tracie?
Another good site that's similar is Austin Klein's site. It's about.com, which hosts a number of sites, but his is the atheism agnostic section. Again, it's Austin Klein, and if you're just looking for ideas, he's got a forum in there, and he's also got, I think, over 10,000 articles that relate to like atheist and theist issues. I think what you're doing is good as far as just asking people for their arguments and input, and then thinking about them and evaluating them. That's probably how everybody goes about it, or just about everybody. And we mentioned earlier in the show that there's an author, George H. Smith, who has a couple of books that actually put forward what I think are some pretty good skeptical ideas about why he doesn't accept the concept of God. And I think just reading those arguments and thinking about them and saying, do these questions make sense? Is the are these criticisms valid, or are they not valid? And just if people are putting forward their best cases, all you can do is look at those cases and evaluate. In the end, I just don't know how anybody. I look at it like, if you're going to have a belief, that means that you accept the claim as true, and true is what aligns with reality. If you can't compare the claim to the reality, I don't know how you make an assessment or even a judgment that it's true. How do I assign it a value of true if I'm unable to look at the reality of it? So in other words, if I tell you there's a chair in the next room, and you go into the next room, you open the door, and you don't see a chair, then you would say that that was not a true statement, right? It was a false statement. If you go in there and you look and there is a chair in there, then you would say that you believe my claim, that you accept it as true, that there is a chair in there because you went in and you verified there's a chair in that room. But what if you can't get into the room? I mean, how do you assess my claim? And no matter how many arguments I put forward, how do you make an assessment of the truth of it when that door is locked and you can't look in the room? That's what I think bothers me the most, is the idea that it's all about these arguments and nobody wants to give you access to the chair. And it's like, well, why can't you have access to the chair? And if you can't have access to the chair, why are you so hot to convince me it's in there when you can't even get through that locked door? How are you so sure that it's there, right? And I think
definitely.
And so for me, you know, there's all these arguments, and like Martin says, you can spend years looking at the arguments, looking at the but ultimately it's going to come down to a question of whether or not you're willing to believe arguments, to put your what you assign as true about reality into somebody's argument versus saying, unless you can validate this argument in some way, I'm simply going to remain on the fence. I am not going to assign it a value of true. I'm not going to say that what you're saying is true if we have no way to verify this. If it's just you think it makes sense, but you can't verify it, and I can't verify it, and nobody can verify it, it's an unknown.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one of my biggest problems. I always try to see arguments from other sets of people and try to listen to the evidence back and forth and make my own conclusions from it. But I see so many negative examples from people. I see positive and negative examples from both sides. I see theism. There's a school in Indiana that my friend went to in high school, and they are completely brainwashed with the whole thing. They don't even allow so much as a simple hug or friendship in there, claiming that it's sexual. Yeah. And at the same time, I see negative aspects from people from atheism who try to shove it down the throats of other people. I'm not saying it's dependent entirely on a person.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'm just trying to formulate my argument because there's always extremes.
And I hate to interrupt you, Tim, but we're going to have to let you go now because they are throwing up the credits.